Welcome to Crossroads, a show by the Epoch Times, one of America's largest independent newspapers that brings you insights beyond the headlines. Now make sure to hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to our show. Get updates when the next one is. Now look, merit-based hiring. Imagine that, hiring people based on skill. It's making a comeback. And the federal government has now officially dropped a policy going back over 40 years which until now held that tests to ensure that government employees are actually qualified for their jobs are racist. And that's no longer the determination. Now they're saying, well, you just can't hire people who are not qualified. The shift in policy aims to ensure that government is hiring based on skill, not by the color of your skin. Post-Millennial said this. They said on Friday, the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice put an end to a Carter administration decree that required federal agencies to get permission before implementing testing of job applicants to determine who was the best person for the position. No testing without permission, for that may be racist. It says the consent decree stemmed from the Lunavo v. Ezel case brought by Angel Luvano in 1979, in which he alleged that the Professional Administrative Career Examination, which was used to filter federal job applicants, was racist. Those racist tests determining whether you're qualified or not. It says, as a result of the case, the testing was paused for 5 years, and it's been on pause ever since. And look at the consequences. It says this, quote, they say it's simple. Competence and merit are the standards by which we should all be judged, nothing more and nothing less, said attorney Jeanine Pirro, who is now in her position, by the way. She was formerly with Fox News now. She's a district attorney in Washington, D.C. And she added, quote, it's about time people are judged not by their identity, but instead by the content of their character. In other words, realizing the dream of Martin Luther King Jr., who said that one day he had a dream that people will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. We're now actually putting that into effect. Unfortunately, the race narrative for a long time did judge people by the color of their skin, in what was referred to as reverse discrimination, the use of discrimination to fight discrimination. But people are saying, well, that sounds kind of racist, and the determination now is that that is racism, actually. If you're judging people by their race, not by their skill, not by their character, and you're telling people they get in or out just depending on what color their skin is, that is discrimination. And that is the way the Trump administration is now viewing this in terms of its interpretation of these civil rights laws. The federal government now is going to very likely bring back testing, even if they say tests are racist. They're saying, no, this is a blind test, the color of your skin does not matter, and may the best man or woman win. Now, speaking of government employees, federal employees who were involved in the investigations into President Donald Trump going back to the 2016 elections, they're now finding themselves under investigation. The investigators are now being investigated. And now a special counsel has been opened to investigate former Special Counsel Jack Smith. The special counsel, former, now has a special counsel investigating him. Just the News said this. The Office of Special Counsel, the OSC, has opened a formal investigation into former Special Counsel Jack Smith over his 2 probes into President Donald Trump following allegations he played politics with the cases. Remember, the Trump side, they're saying the whole thing was basically an insurrection, a coup d'etat. They were trying to overthrow the government using what appeared to be the legal arms of investigation. Now, the other side denies this. They say it's a ridiculous accusation, but investigations are now moving forward really on the more Trump side of the interpretation. It says here, the OSC, an independent federal agency, confirmed reports of the investigation on Saturday. They say Smith led the criminal investigation into allegations that Trump mishandled classified documents and that his actions on January 6, 2021 were an attempt to overturn the 2020 election. That was the grand conspiracy that they alleged had taken place. that Trump denying the results of the election, Trump challenging the results, calling for investigations, leading up to his, the protests that were organized on January 6th, which led to people entering the building, that all of this is part of a grand conspiracy through which Trump was trying to overthrow democracy itself. In the end, that was not the determination. It says here, he was never convicted of crimes in either case. Jack Smith, of course, very reluctantly dropped the case at the very end after Trump won the vote. They note the Hatch Act unit of the OSC is leading the investigation, according to an email reviewed by the New York Post. It says the unit enforces the law that restricts government employees from engaging in political activities in their official capacities. A big deal, by the way, because if the allegation is that Jack Smith was effectively acting in political interest, this suggests they're going after him in a violation of the Hatch Act. That again, as a government employee, he's accused, or at least being investigated under the allegations, that he may have been using his position not for actual law enforcement, not for an actual legitimate investigation, but instead with the intent of creating a political effect, altering the outcome of the election, or just destroying one of the main political candidates in the United States, now president. Now, is that true or not? We shall see. The investigation is just beginning, and we'll probably be hearing a lot more about it as it moves forward. Now, notes the investigation comes after Arkansas Republican Senator Tom Cotton urged acting special counsel Jamison Greer to investigate Smith, questioning whether Smith violated federal law by acting in an alleged political manner to undermine Trump in his presidential bid last year. Because remember, one of those investigations was taking place while Trump was again running for office, when Trump was one of the leading political candidates in the United States. And also, the recommendations of Smith had the effect of triggering some of the criminal investigations into Trump, which did serve to undermine his campaign. But they said this, quote, "I appreciate the Office of Special Counsel taking this seriously and launching an investigation into Jack Smith's conduct. No one is above the law," Cotton told the outlet, and they added, "Jack Smith's actions were clearly driven to hurt President Trump's election, and Smith should be held fully accountable." It notes that Smith and the OSC have not yet publicly commented on the new investigation. That's going to be important also because it cannot be denied that the special counsel investigations and the criminal referrals from it, where they did actually carry out, raids on Trump and investigations into Trump, actual criminal investigations, which led to just ongoing attacks on Trump, that part cannot be denied. The fact that Trump was investigated, the fact that the investigations were done in such a way to trigger hit pieces on him, that the entire media apparatus was using that to try to undermine his political campaign, that journalists were involved, that politicians were involved, using these things, saying Trump is a criminal, he's under investigation for this and for that, that he overthrew democracy and so on, that the entire narrative landscape was being fed by this. If it turns out that that was the intent, not a belief that Trump was actually a criminal, but that the intent instead was to create a political effect, that would be the determination. That would be what they have to prove, and we shall see if they ever find evidence on that. Because, again, hypothetically speaking, from the periphery, you could say that, well, that was what it did, but was that what it was meant to do? That'll be the big question. We'll have to see. Now, look, in other news, though, in addition to the push to make Americans healthy again, there's also now a push to make us all fit again. I'll be talking more about this after a quick break.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your medals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back. If you're enjoying the show, support us by hitting that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. This really does help get the show out to more people. Now look, in other news, in addition to the push to make Americans healthy again, there's also now a push to make us all fit again. And this new campaign was announced by Trump and others during a White House briefing. Watch this.
Well, I'm delighted to be here with some of the truly great sports legends of all time as we formally announce the newest members of the President's Council on Sports, Fitness, and Nutrition.
We have an opportunity to literally change the fabric of kids' lives. And our first initiative is to bring back President's Fitness Test.
I think the time is so important. Obesity is the highest it's ever been. Mental health, as we all know, the need ought to be tackled.
Help make our youth healthy, help get them engaged in sports, and let them learn what it takes to be successful in life.
Kids are healthier, they're happier, they do better when they're out there, they're being active, they're playing in sports, they're hanging out with their friends.
Reinstill that spirit of competition and that spirit and that commitment to nutrition and physical fitness. And I'm so grateful to President Trump for your leadership in bringing this back for our country.
Imagine that, bringing back the fitness test. Something that many of us might remember growing up, and hey, it's on its way back. And also bringing back a focus on sports and healthy competition. Remember, this was normal in the United States when they started reforming PE, right, physical education. A lot of that happened with Common Core, and it was during the Obama administration. They kind of got rid of a lot of those requirements. When I was a kid, this was very normal, though. You had to go and change into your gym clothes, and you had to go and play volleyball or basketball or whatever else. Part of that, of course, was to ensure that kids are actually being active, that kids are learning how to play sports. Even if they're not into it, like myself, I was not very good at sports, but I knew how to play the games. I knew how to play soccer, I knew how to play baseball, I knew how to play football, because they taught us how to play it. Part of the reason they do this is because they want kids to not be sitting in front of their screens all day. And we've seen the opposite effect for many years now, where kids spend 7-8 hours a day staring at their screens. Is that healthy for them? Well, probably not. I can tell you personally, I was never good at sports. I played them. I was horrible. I was so bad at them. I was a surfer, and I was into martial arts, but team sports I was horrible at. When I played baseball, okay, I had a perfect batting average only because the ball used to hit me all the time. So when I played Little League, I was so bad at it that they put me in a Little League for the younger kids, and so I was like the big kid on the Little League who was the worst player on the team. Every time I went to bat, because I was the big kid, for some reason, the ball would strike me almost every time to the point where I had a perfect batting average. So they used me to get bases. When I played basketball, I was such a space cadet. I'd be staring at the clouds, and almost every time someone passed the ball to me, it hit me in the face. I was horrible at sports. But I support them coming back. I think it's a great idea. I like the fact that I learned how to play them, and I hope the kids who are better at sports than I was, and that would be most of them, I hope that they can learn to play sports too. I think it's a fantastic thing. We'll see where this goes, of course. Some areas have sports that are more in line with what I would have enjoyed doing. I know if you go to some beach communities, they even have like surf. They have surf teams and so on. We'll see what they do with it. The other side with this too is a lot of schools had to close their sports programs because a lot of the money went into English as second language. Now that they have changed that, this is kind of the other side they're not really talking about here. Now that they've made English the official language of the United States, and they've made it so that, again, government programs don't need to have more than one language, that also means public schools. And so now that public schools don't have to fund all of that, they can put the money back into sports. Many schools had to close their sports programs because they had limited budgets and they couldn't afford to keep doing it. Now that they, again, will probably have their money, they'll probably have the budgets for it, they can start putting it into things like this. So we will hopefully see kids become maybe more team-oriented again, getting out, becoming more active again. At least that's the goal with this. At the end, it's going to be up to the kids, right? Now, as you also saw in that video, though, pro wrestler Triple H is also on it. Triple H actually said this on X as well. He said, "Honored doesn't begin to describe what this opportunity means." He said, "Physical fitness has been a part of my life from a young age and has created the path to support myself and family beyond my wildest dreams. The President's Council on Physical Fitness is a vehicle to get young people active and healthy." And what a great thing that would be, right? Now, like, also speaking about health, RFK Jr. with HHS, he recently had mercury-based Thiomersal banned from the use in vaccines. And this ban, it actually had mixed reactions. Some people said that he was right in doing it. Some people said he was wrong. Many people tried arguing, well, yeah, it's mercury, but it's not a harmful type of mercury. There's different types. RFK Jr. is defending his decision to have this banned. He's saying, well, there's mixed science, right? And you can argue what you want based on the science. There was a lot of research suggesting it is very dangerous, and RFK has now published a new statement explaining the science on that side of it and why the decision was made. Watch this.
I want to talk a little bit about my reasons. In early 2001, the director of the FDA Office of Vaccine Research and Review, late William Egan, admitted under oath before Congress that thimersaul's safety had never been studied in human beings. Further, CDC has no existing guidelines for safe exposures to ethyl mercury. It is therefore inexcusable that these agencies allowed neurotoxic mercury to be injected into Americans for so long. A quick search of the National Library of Medicine's PubMed and PubChem websites, and that's thousands of studies on search terms such as mercury neurotoxicity, mercury in development, and mercury in the brain. Hundreds of them identify thimerosal as a potent neurotoxin, a carcinogen, a mutagen, and an endocrine disruptor. But let's put all that peer-reviewed science aside and just look at what the government itself and the vaccine industry say about thimerosal. Thimerasol's own label advises against its use during pregnancy, pointing out that thimerosal has never been shown to be safe and that it causes mutations in mammals. Thimerasol's material safety data sheet acknowledges that thimerosal is toxic, that it has nervous system and reproductive effects, that it's mutagenic in mammalian cells, that exposure to mercury and thimerosal in utero and in children could cause mild to severe mental retardation and mild to severe motor coordination impairment.
Now, there are many mixed claims on whether or not this type of mercury in vaccines is actually dangerous. Some people claim it's not, some people say it is, just like with other chemicals and ingredients used in just about everything from food to vaccines. Now, RFK is showing his side of it, and as you saw, he did make it clear there are, in fact, studies showing the chemical is harmful. The problem we have with food and vaccines, frankly, there's not a lot of public research showing the effects of the individual chemicals within these things. A lot of people who claim these things are harmful, oftentimes they refer to studies that were done on animals. The problem is a lot of the studies done on animals are not taken into account from the official bodies in terms of how it affects humans. And that's oftentimes where the divide is on whether or not it's harmful. People say, well, studies have shown it's harmful. The other side says, well, the studies are inconclusive, incomplete, because they don't really do studies on some of this stuff on humans. And it's because of that they're able to say it's generally regarded as safe, the GRAS acronym, G-R-A-S, generally regarded as safe, where they write off oftentimes the animal studies, or they don't acknowledge the official studies, and they say that those don't count as official industry studies. The industry doesn't study it, and because the industry doesn't study it, they say, well, it's generally regarded as safe because we said so. And that's how you get a lot of these chemicals in your food and drugs and everything else. Now, like on the point of the pharmaceutical industry, though, there's more on that. The Trump administration, they were trying to get companies to lower the prices of drugs. The administration is still trying to make them do that. They want to have the pharmaceutical companies comply with the policies that would otherwise force them to lower the cost of drugs for Americans. Now, you might remember Trump had an executive order where these companies are supposed to, ordered to give Americans the most favored nation prices, meaning if a country in Europe charges the lowest price in all of Europe, they have to give that same price to Americans. And companies, they're not acting on it. They're just ignoring it. They're not doing it. Trump is now reaching out to them directly. And he's telling them, hey, do it, or it's going to be bad news for you. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt, she read out what Trump said in one of those letters. Watch this.
Moving forward, the only thing I will accept from drug manufacturers is a commitment that provides American families immediate relief from the vastly inflated drug prices and an end to the free ride of American innovation by European and other developed nations. Accordingly, I'm calling on Eli Lilly and Company and every manufacturer doing business in our great country to take the following actions within the next 60 days. Extend the most favored nation pricing to Medicaid, guarantee most favored nation pricing for newly launched drugs, return increased revenues abroad to American patients and taxpayers, provide for direct purchasing at most favored nation pricing. The President's team, including Secretary Kennedy and Administrator Oz, stand ready to implement these terms. The President expects to further engage with them immediately in good faith to deliver relief for American families. Make no mistake, a collaborative effort towards achieving global pricing parity would be the most effective path for companies, the government, and American patients. But if you refuse to step up, we will deploy every tool in our arsenal to protect American families from continued abusive drug pricing practices. Americans are demanding lower drug prices, and they need them today. Other nations have been freeloading on U.S. innovation for far too long, and it is time they pay their fair share.
Now, what's interesting is in that letter, Trump is referring to the global price difference as what he calls global freeloading, right? And he's arguing the companies are giving other countries lower prices, making Americans pay the difference. This is an important detail within what he's doing, because if you watched Primetime, we were kind of debating this on the show last week. There are arguments that Trump trying to order these companies to lower their prices, that this is the United States trying to make international price setting. That Trump is saying, okay, company, you have to give Americans this price. That's not what's happening. That's actually what Europe does. So the European governments, when they negotiate prices, because remember, they have socialist medicine in those countries. In Canada, they have socialist medicine. The government more handles the price negotiations. And when they tell the companies, hey, you have to keep it low, what happens, what's being done is this. The pharmaceutical companies, they sell to those countries. And let's say, for example, there's research and development, there's overhead costs, there's all these other things they take into account. They charge these countries a fraction of it. So instead of paying $100, they'll pay $10 or they'll pay $20. And then the argument here is that because these other countries are doing price setting, the companies then charge Americans the difference. An example of this would be if you went out to dinner with a bunch of friends. The check comes out $200. You have 3 friends who pay $10 each, and you have to pay $170. Americans are paying the $170. The Europeans are paying the $10. The argument is the price is, there, and Americans are having to pick up the tab for the difference. The Trump side, what they're doing is they're saying that if these companies are charging a lower price to any one of these developed countries, meaning they can still do this to the undeveloped countries like Africa and Latin America, whatever, they can still charge low for those countries. But if Europe or Canada or any developed country is paying a low price, that's the price they have to give to Americans. Again, the argument here is that if they're offering a low price, that they don't have to. That if they're offering a price like that, then hypothetically speaking, if that is a price they can offer without forcing somebody else to pay the difference, then that is the price they should be giving to the American people as well. And so this will force these companies to charge based on what is, more of a standardized price, probably for all developed countries. Now for Europe, for European nations, that's going to be very bad news. For Canada, that's horrible news. I don't know if Mexico counts in this, that'd be terrible news. For Americans, this is great news because it means Americans will no longer be subsidizing the low cost of medication for the socialist healthcare systems of the rest of the developed world. And we'll see if it works out or not, because the companies seem to be trying to delay this. Because if they can hold out for another 3 years or 2 years, we'll see what happens, or another year with the midterms, there is the possibility they can block it if they can play the long game. Trump right now is putting pressure on them saying, hey, bad news for you. We'll use everything at our disposal to go after you if you don't comply. And we'll see if that actually happens. Now, in other news, though, the issue of transnational repression and the Chinese Communist Party's subversion, it's getting a lot bigger right now. The FBI has now announced it has launched a new office to monitor Chinese Communist Party subversion in New Zealand. And the focus is not just on New Zealand. It's also on many of the surrounding countries, including the island nations. In fact, FBI Director Kash Patel also just announced that he's talking to the members of the Australian government to work with them to combat CCP subversion in that entire region, not just their countries, but of the surrounding islands. Epoch Times said this. They said the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, has opened a new office in Wellington, New Zealand, expanding its presence in the Pacific to address growing security threats, including cybercrime, espionage, and influence from the Chinese Communist Party. It says FBI Director Kash Patel, who made a discreet visit to Wellington, said in a video released by the U.S. Embassy that countering the CCP in the Pacific region is one of the most important global issues facing the two countries. He said further in, the new Wellington office will now take on regional responsibility for Antarctica, Samoa, Niue, the Cook Islands, and Tonga. Now, why does that matter? Well, the CCP, it's hugely involved in that region. This includes economic takeover. One example of this in New Zealand, the Chinese Communist Party has been taking over the dairy industry, one of the GDP products of New Zealand. If you talk about Australia, the Chinese Communist Party took over one of their major GDP industries, which is the mining industry, buying up mines, buying up those operations, and then working to control the politics of those countries by controlling the economies. Now, in terms of political subversion, they're also heavily involved in many of the island nations in particular. The problem you have when you have economic takeover, if a foreign country controls your GDP, well, what does GDP mean? It means they control the jobs. It means they control people's paychecks. And it controls, of course, the people who get that, meaning the voters. The unions, the representatives, the whole industries, they will then advocate for the politician who backs the interest of the industries. And if a foreign country controls the industries, that means they will back politicians who have interest in backing that foreign government. This is one of the ways the CCP uses business and economics and, again, like those kinds of operations to control the nation itself. But it goes deeper than that. The CCP is also using bribery, it's using blackmail, it's using other means to get politicians in its pockets. And part of that also involves going into these island nations and saying, hey, you have a choice of aligning with the United States and the Five Eyes countries, New Zealand, Australia, the U.S., included in that region, or you have an interest in getting aligned with the Chinese Communist Party, which currently is trying to expand its military operations beyond its borders. They're trying to get into those regions. One of the major operations the CCP has in these island nations is a police initiative being run by the regime's Ministry of Public Security. The MPS, the Ministry of Public Security, they also run these secret Chinese police stations, but they're also running what they call a global policing operation, where they're offering to train the police in other countries. And part of that also involves the CCP setting up shop in other countries where they're having Chinese police work hand in hand with the local police. In particular, in these island nations in that region, they're aggressively trying to push this. Also among the key concerns with the CCP's footprint in that region, the CCP is working to get military agreements with some of these island leaders. Now, the intent of that for the CCP is it can build up military operations pushing out of the second island chain, they call it, right? The CCP right now has a lot of territorial disputes, South China Sea, East China Sea. It's having problems with the militaries of Vietnam and the Philippines. It's threatening constantly Taiwan. It's having territorial disputes with Japan. That entire region is being stirred up because the CCP is trying to extend its military reach beyond that region. The power play the CCP is now doing is it's working with island nations around New Zealand, and it's trying to set up military bases in those areas so it can put pressure on Australia and then use that to fundamentally suppress Australia, suppress New Zealand, and so on. The United States now appears to be taking this very seriously. The FBI, again, is even establishing an office in New Zealand where it can investigate these operations and hopefully overturn the issue of the Chinese Communist Party's subversion and corruption of foreign governments. Now, it's not even just becoming more of an issue for the CCP and transnational oppression, though, with the U.S. focused on it. Even other governments are focused on this. The United Kingdom, for example, big focus on this threat. Epoch Times said this: transnational repression by foreign governments has been growing unchecked in the United Kingdom. A parliamentary committee warned in a report published on July 30th. They say the Joint Committee on Human Rights, the JCHR, said in its report that foreign states, including Russia, China, and Iran, have targeted individuals in the UK using a range of tactics such as surveillance, online harassment, political bounties, meaning police bounties offering rewards for their arrest, Interpol red notices. The CCP has heavy control over Interpol, lawsuits, right, lawfare, legal warfare, and even, it says, assassinations. They see among a dozen foreign states accused of conducting transnational repression in the UK, the Chinese regime, they say, quote, conducts the most comprehensive TNR, transnational repression campaign, of any foreign state operating in the UK, according to the report. It says the report accuses the Chinese regime of being one of the most prolific abusers of Interpol's notice system, alongside Russia and Turkey. And it's that Bahrain, Egypt, Eritrea, India, Pakistan, Rwanda, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates are also alleged perpetrators in the TNR in the UK, the report reads. Now it notes this. It said Lord David Alton, chair of the JCHR, said in a statement that the committee is concerned there is a growth of foreign repression on UK soil that is going unchecked. And this is important, by the way. The Chinese Communist Party actually has operations to study the politics of foreign countries, to study the legal systems of foreign countries, including sending its future government employees to study law at major universities, return to China, and then work with the Chinese military on political warfare operations. The Chinese military has an entire branch dedicated to political warfare that advises, informs, and runs these operations. For the CCP, this is a military operation, it's a spy operation, it's a business operation, and it's a political operation, because the Chinese Communist Party rolls all of these into one common thing, where it's just the CCP running operations to control other countries and to silence any dissent, to silence critics, to silence journalists, to bribe and corrupt politicians, and to turn a free country into a puppet state of the Chinese Communist Party. If this is not stopped, you will see puppet states of the CCP arising all across the globe, and they're very aggressively doing it right now. Now back to the United States, though, on another topic. Well, election security is now back in the headlines, not just with Kash Patel, of course, looking into the CCP's possible subversion of our own election system, including a plot to rig our elections using fake IDs and mail-in ballots. There's other things to it. The Trump administration, they're now using a nationwide effort, and they want to clean the voting rolls. Just the News said this. The Trump Justice Department has launched a nationwide effort to clean up voter rolls ahead of the 2026 elections, pushing states to purge duplicate and outdated registrations and catch any non-citizens or illegal aliens who slipped into a position to vote, officials told Just the News on Saturday. It notes that notifications have gone out to several states and localities that DOJ's Civil Rights Division, the one that's doing a lot of other things, has been concerned that states are not complying with federal laws, including California, Wisconsin, Utah, and New Hampshire. And they say, unlike the previous administration at President Trump's DOJ, we will fight to have fair and secure elections, and that begins with making our voter rolls accurate, Attorney General Pam Bondi told Just the News. Now, it seems it's actually part of a much larger campaign right now. It actually goes beyond even just cleaning up the voter rolls. CNN said this. They said a few weeks ago, Republican election officials in Colorado began receiving unsolicited calls and texts from a GOP consultant, Republican consultant, who said he was working with the Trump administration on election integrity. In a text to one of the officials, the consultant, Jeff Small, indicated he was acting on a request from Stephen Miller, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff. And they said in a phone call with another clerk, Small said he was coordinating with the White House and the Justice Department to, quote, implement an elections executive order signed by President Donald Trump, recalled Justin Grantham, the top election official in Fremont County. And it's at Grantham and Carly Copps, who it says oversees election in Weld County in northern Colorado, told CNN that small requests were made, a specific request, would give a third party access to their election equipment. And they say both declined to do that. Big stuff, in other words, happening to secure the elections of the United States. Now, there's different arguments with this. I know Democrats say, okay, fine, there have been a few cases where illegal immigrants were found, or non-U.S. citizens were found to have registered to vote. Some of them did cast votes. They're saying it's not enough to ever overturn an election. Back in the 2020 elections, that was also the allegation. They said, okay, there was some fraud, but it was not enough to overturn the elections. The conservative side says, well, look, you might say that, but the problem was most of the evidence was never actually investigated. Yeah, you say that the Supreme Court had cases, different courts had cases. The problem was none of them even looked at it. It was never investigated. And how do you say there was no crime if you never looked into it? Believe which side you want. On the point of universal mail-in ballots, this is one of the big problems. If you have unclean voter rolls, what were they doing back in 2020 with the mail-in ballots? They were going through the voter rolls and they were sending mail-in ballots to every name on them. If you had mail-in ballots being sent to people who had already moved out of state, who might have not been eligible, who were dead, it means that if they don't clean their voting rolls, all those names are still on there. And that would mean they would be sending unnecessary ballots to certain addresses. I can say personally, when I was living in New York during the time of the 2020 elections, I received 3 mail-in ballots that were not me. They were Hispanic names. I lived in a Hispanic neighborhood, and these were just random mail-in ballots that were sent to me, and I've heard cases of a lot of other people having that. Now, you could say that does not constitute a problem. It does if a person chooses to fill out the mail-in ballots that were accidentally sent to them because voter rolls were never cleared. Now, did that happen? We don't know. The other problem is you had, of course, bundling that was allowed. People were able to collect mail-in ballots, go to ballot drop boxes anonymously, and drop them off. So if you create the ability to have ballots sent to everybody, you don't clean your voter rolls, meaning you have people who were not eligible, who are dead, who moved out of state, having ballots sent to their houses, and then you create the ability for people to anonymously fill those out and drop them off, including in groups. Does that create a problem? Well, I'd say it creates a loophole at the very least. And it does seem the Trump administration is trying to close that loophole. Now, is that necessary? Is that unnecessary? You be the judge. I'm not here to preach to all of you, right? You be the judge on that, but there is a movement now taking place to do that. That said, questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, leave it in the chat. Let's jump into a conversation. First off, from TZ Burton, you're saying, it's not fair that Americans have to subsidize socialist medicine. You know, and I'd agree too. And it's crazy. It's crazy to think. Look at the big picture, how much stuff we were paying for. We're picking up the tab of the extra costs for the pharmaceutical drugs in these countries. Americans were subsidizing, because the companies were putting the extra costs on us, subsidizing these socialist medical programs in Europe and in Canada. Is that fair to Americans? Look, I know people who will like drive themselves to the hospital because they don't want to pay for an ambulance. I can tell you a funny story, okay? This is a family friend, one of my dad's friends. This was in Oceanside back before. Oceanside in California is a very nice place these days. You know, that's where you have, it's right by Camp Pendleton. It used to be a military town. These days it's like a nice surfing town. They have the Top Gun house. One of my dad's best friends used to live in the Top Gun house. We grew up, we'd stay in the Top Gun house, right? It's a pie shop these days, but back then it was an actual house. One of my dad's surfer friends lived in Oceanside, and it was a bad neighborhood at the time. He was in a parking lot, he was getting into his car. Guy comes up to his window, says, "Get out of the car, you know, this is a robbery." Pulls a gun out. My dad's friend is like, "Nope." Hits the gas, drives off. The guy shoots at his car, hits his friend in the arm with a bullet, right? My dad's friend, they're like, "Dude, like, go to the hospital." He's like, "No, I'm not going to the hospital." He's like, "If I go to the hospital, they're gonna give me a tetanus shot and charge me $500. I'm not going to the hospital," right? It's like, costs too much money. It's not worth it. Finally, his wife, you know, it was a clean, not to sound too much like an American, it was a clean shot. There was no heavy bleeding. It didn't hit anything important, right? So he was like, I'll just leave it be. Finally, his wife is like, "Have you lost your mind? Go to the doctor. What's wrong with you?" He's like, "Fine." He goes to the doctor. They give him a tetanus shot and they charge him $500. Exactly what he said was going to happen. Anyways, Americans will go to great lengths to not go to the doctor because it costs too much money. Our medical system is totally not affordable. I know people who are diabetics. They get groups together. They have one of them. They take turns doing it. Drive to Mexico. They buy insulin and they bring it back because it's cheaper in Mexico and you don't have all the red tape, right, causing the crazy high costs here. One of the reasons why you have crazy costs of drugs in the United States, and there's a few of them, it's not just one thing, is because we're picking up other people's tabs. We are paying the extra costs. We're the guys sitting at the table where everyone's throwing $10 down for the check and we're picking up the difference. And so Trump is trying to put an end to that, which I think is great. But I mean, it's crazy. Even beyond this, we were picking up the tab on like their military budgets, where they're not paying what they even agreed to pay for like NATO defense budgets. We're paying the extra on that. We're picking up the tab on the United Nations budgets, where we're paying like massive amounts into different UN agencies. We're picking up the tab on global programs for like, you know, just, I mean, you'd like to think it's like food and medicine, but it's everything. We're paying for like gender study programs and birth control programs and, you know, I don't know, like homosexual TV shows and stuff like that. I don't know why we're doing that. We're doing stuff like that. The amount of stuff we're subsidizing is crazy. And what's interesting now is Americans are becoming aware of this. We're like, why are we basically subsidizing deadbeat governments and countries in just about every corner of the earth? and then allowing mass migration of people who don't like it there because the countries aren't improving from it. And I've seen arguments from some of these countries too. Some of them say it's not even helping them. They're saying that dependence is not making them become better places. Dependence is maintaining the bad state that they're in some cases. Now, what is going to happen when we stop subsidizing it? Well, that's, and not to mention all the bad trade deals where they've been ripping us off with they tariff us, they put fines on us in the whole 9 yards, and we just don't do it back. I know a lot of countries are now saying that America is evil because we're going to tariff them. I'd raise the question, if they think tariffs are evil, do they criticize the tariffs that they were putting on American goods? Has Canada criticized in protests against its tariffs on American goods? Has the European Union do you see marches on the streets of Germany against the German tariffs on American cars? Do you see people protesting against their own government's tariffs against the Americans? No. Well, if tariffs are what's wrong, then why is that? Why do they not protest against tariffs when they're doing it, but they say tariffs are bad when we do it? Maybe it's not really about tariffs. Maybe it's not about that. Maybe it's because they like the fact that Americans trade at a loss and it's good for them. What you're going to watch happen is that these countries are, you think of it as like, the kid's 18, time to go into the real world. Now they're 30, they're 45, and they're still living in the basement. And they're getting told now, time to go out in the real world and get a job. They're going to have to find ways to make a living, to subsidize their medical industries and their militaries and have a functioning economy without the United States propping it up. And that is going to be something big for some of these countries where it's happening rapidly, meaning that they're not going to be able to pay it. And you might actually watch some of these countries face huge economic problems in the interim as this takes place. Is that kind? I don't know. Not to them, but to Americans, I'd say it is. But was it fair for Americans to be basically subsidizing all of these things for so long? I'd say no. This was not fair to the United States and not fair to the American people for a very long time. Judy Akeem, you're saying RFK, and again, in my opinion, right? That's my personal take. Judy Akeem, you're saying RFK's idea about wearables and how everyone should be using them can backfire very easily. I have an odd feeling about it. Yeah, if you all watched Primetime, we had a very interesting discussion about that last week. Primetime, of course, it's a show. We do it every Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It's me and Roman from Epic Times and good crew from the NTD side, which is our sister media. That's an NTD program. They're the sister media of Epic Times. They do fantastic work. Really good stuff, actually, if you want to watch some good shows. We had a conversation about wearables and health monitoring. I don't like it. My personal, I don't like it one bit. But there is a push for this, and including from the Trump side. They're talking about using health trackers. Maybe you have like a Fitbit thing, or who knows what it'll be in the future. This is not something they're forcing on people. It's not something like they're saying you have to do it. But there is a movement to have this being done, not even just with us choosing to have wearable devices. Maybe you have on your smartphone downloadable apps that track fitness. Maybe it was something that came with the phone and you have it installed. There's also the issue where they're even doing this through the medical system. They're standardizing some of the health records across different industries, not just the hospitals, but also the insurance companies. It's all getting standardized. Now, you could say that makes your life easier. There are some benefits to that. My concern is this, and this is what I raised during Primetime. When you're creating a centralized system to monitor people's health, it might start off voluntary. Oftentimes, eventually, it will not be voluntary. It might not be enforced through the government, but it can be enforced through the insurance companies. It can be enforced or at least encouraged by hospitals. They might say that we only accept digital records and you have to do this if you want to have our services. Because, hey, we don't have a fax machine. We're not living in the 70s, you know. And so if you want to work with us, you got to use the modern system. You know, fair enough, right? The problem you have with health trackers, though, whether it's the wristbands or the smartphone apps or anything else, yes, that's not being done by the government. It's being done by private companies. The problem we have is that how are these services profitable? Well, sometimes it's selling a device, but oftentimes they sell your health data. Oftentimes when you turn it on, you open it up, and it asks, you're greeted with the terms and services page. You click yes. A lot of us don't even read the terms and services. What have you just agreed to? Oftentimes you've agreed to them monitoring your health, keeping track of your health, documenting your health, maintaining those records, and selling those records. Now, who can they sell it to? They can sell it to private businesses. They can sell it to big data companies. They can sell it to health companies, hospitals, third parties, medical research organizations, anything. Scientific research organizations trying to do data analysis. And yes, they can oftentimes even sell it to governments. You might argue, well, the Constitution protects us from, those types of searches and seizures. The Constitution protects us from that. Yes, but the government can buy it from companies, and if you have already agreed to sell your data, allow it to be sold, if you've already signed your name and agreed to let that data be monitored and given, then you've given up your constitutional rights that would have prevented that from happening. Now, on some sides you might say, well, what's the big problem? I don't think RFK Jr. is interested in, some nefarious health monitor. In no way do I believe that's his intent. Absolutely not. I don't think that's why he wants it. This can be used to, for example, to monitor for outbreaks, to look for signs of, hey, maybe there's an Ebola outbreak, maybe there's a Black Plague outbreak, maybe there's COVID's coming back. You know what I mean? Who knows? This will give them very rapid data on where problems are. If they find that Americans are being exposed to a chemical in a certain area, maybe a train derails and dumps a bunch of chemicals, and you have a health crisis, like in Palestine in the U.S., right? If that happens, then they can track the health of those people, and they can say, okay, these people are developing problems. It all started around this time, and they can solve it. There are very non-nefarious ways that data can be used that is beneficial to public health. My concern is this. I don't believe the U.S. is going to do some terrible thing with this, but my concern is this. In some countries, it is used for evil purposes. The Chinese Communist Party is one of the biggest examples of this. The CCP, all of your health data is maintained on your phone. Your health data is tied in with your social credit system. Your health data is tied in with your records. Your records include your political beliefs. It includes your family information. It includes your health data, all of your biometrics. It includes every drop of data about your health. It includes everything. Are you a good citizen or are you a bad citizen? What do you believe? What do you like? What do you dislike? Maybe not in China, they don't have elections, but who would you vote for, let's say in another country? All of that data is monitored. All of it is maintained in a common record. And all of it in China is used to it's used to suppress you, right? If you're a good citizen, you get the good boy treatment. If you're a bad citizen, you get the bad boy treatment. And they use it as a form of social control. They can debank you. They can force you to be homeless, for example, in China. Now, the CCP is trying to export that model. They're trying to do that. Now, you might say, well, why do we care? Why do I care if they get that data? Why would I ever care? Well, here's the thing. In the United States, we're protected from the government doing it to you, but you're not protected from private businesses doing it to you. Already we see banks are getting access to data, and someone says something mean on the internet and they get debanked. We're already seeing that credit card companies are using, things that should represent freedom of speech, And they're even, canceling people's payment operations using this kind of data. We're already seeing that social media companies are deplatforming people because of political views and political speech, because it violates their terms of service. That is not a government operation. Were the government to do it, it would be illegal. But private companies are doing it. We're seeing that private companies are establishing laws through means that are outside the normal legal system. That they have established what would constitute a social credit system, not run by the government, but being run by a collective cartel of major corporations, which are tied into these foreign interests. They are tied to these foreign interests. Back to the point. When you start collecting this type of data, many of us think about how can government use it. The modern problem we have is that it doesn't have to be through government. When you have monopolies that have been established, and the monopolies are able to control your records, they're able to control your speech, your rights, your ability to get loans, any of these things, they can use that as a form of unofficial social control. And they can enforce an alternate worldview of what a person should be like, using alternative means, using their monopoly on industry. And what you would call syndicalism, a type of communism enforced not by government but by unions or by a business cartel, for example. We are kind of already in that state. And so I don't believe that there is a nefarious intent with doing this, but I believe it can and probably will be used by other individuals and groups for nefarious intent. And who knows what it'll turn into 10, 20 years from now. I don't support that one bit for that reason. E. Frago, you're saying, how about these countries setting up police stations in Beijing to enforce New Zealand laws? Wouldn't that be funny, right? And that's also one of the arguments the Trump administration has been using against the CCP. Look, you guys want to come here and strong-arm our companies. You want to come here and you want to establish media organizations and you want to buy up our farmland and you want to buy up real estate, but you don't let us do that in China? How does that work? You want to tell our companies, our tech companies, that if they go to China, that they have to give you, not even sell you, give you access to their source codes. How does that work? We wouldn't, if we did that to you, we'd be in like international criminal court. You want to come here and establish police stations? You don't let us do that. So how does it work that the door is open on one side but closed on the other and we just let them do it? It's ridiculous. One more thought too on health monitoring. I said something on Primetime, and I've said it here before too. I believe that freedom and safety are on a sliding scale. The more freedom you have, the less safety you have. The less freedom you have, probably the more safety you have. The problem is do you want to live in a little padded room? Is that your ideal lifestyle? Do you want to live in a place where you have no freedom of speech and no freedom of belief and no freedom to defend yourself and no freedom of movement because the world is just too dangerous? Or do you want to live in a dangerous world where you have freedom? Now, there's a balance to that. There's extremes of that, of course. I don't want to live in either extreme. I think there has to be some kind of middle ground. And I do believe the United States has found the best example of that middle ground. That you have certain inalienable rights that cannot be infringed upon, and that government has boundaries on how far they can infringe upon those rights. They can't tell you what you can and can't say. They can't tell you what you can and can't believe. You have the ability and right to defend yourself if it's under certain circumstances. And you have other protections as well. Those are the basic ones, but there's a lot of other ones. In other words, limits on the extent of tyranny. Now, when it comes to health tracking, yeah, that has great opportunity. That has great ways to keep us safe. The question is, are the protections worth the potential sacrifice? And I would say no. my same view with guns and Second Amendment. And I know both sides of it. I've talked to police officers, and they tell me horrible stories. You know, they deal with people shooting each other over the stupidest things. Like you get two guys in a road rage incident, and you know, one of them pulls over in a parking lot and shoots the other guy because he can't come down off, you know, from his head. You get people taking the law into their own hands. You get them caught up in the moment, and they kill people, and it's horrible. It is stupid, and they often regret it afterwards. Or you have a guy who someone cuts someone off, and they pull their gun out and shoot at the car, and they end up hitting a kid in the passenger seat. You know, stupid stuff like that. That is, of course, terrible. The question is, though, what have we seen when people do not have the right to bear arms? Well, you see the other side of it. You see African countries where people, 10 guys in a pickup truck can go and carry out a full-scale genocide because people can't defend themselves. You see countries like the Chinese Communist Party rounding people up and harvesting their organs because they believe in religion. You see the Nazis. Yes, the Nazis were all about gun control. They used the gun registries from the Weimar Republic to go and seize people's firearms. Then they loaded people up on trains and put them in concentration camps and killed them. That's what gun control looks like to me, right? So yeah, you could argue horrible. You get stupid people doing stupid things. Absolutely a problem. But when you don't have the ability of people to defend themselves, you get much bigger problems. You get mass genocides. I'd even point to the crime problems in Latin America. Do you know which countries have very strict gun laws? Mexico, Brazil. How safe are those countries? They're not very safe. What are some of the states with the highest murder rates in the United States? Isn't it interesting they're often places with the tightest gun control laws? Why is that? It's almost like people are more likely to kill people and rob people when people can't defend themselves. Again, it's a problem you have. It's a problem you have that people do misuse things. People do use things in stupid ways. And when you give people total freedom, you're always going to have people who abuse it. I love freedom of speech. There are some things I wish people couldn't say, okay? But I have to tolerate that because I believe in freedom of speech. I believe in freedom of belief. Some people believe in crazy things. In America, we have Satanism. You have people using freedom of belief to put up satanic statues in government buildings. I don't agree with that. But that is part of what we have to deal with if you want to not have your own religion get suppressed one day. What is the boundary on it? You know what I mean? It is a problem. In other words, freedom will always be abused by some people, but is the abuse large enough to eliminate freedom itself, right? That is the question we have to ask. And I think if we go back to the Founding Fathers, that was what they took into account. And they said, you know what? Yes, people will abuse their freedom, but the abuses are less of a problem than when people do not have those freedoms. Because the abuses that come about when people do not have those freedoms create much, much bigger problems and are much bigger problems for the human race. And we've seen that, I think, repeatedly with tyrannical, evil governments, often, communist regimes, which, again, what defines those types of governments? The elimination of freedom, right? The destruction of freedom. The first thing to go is often freedom of speech. Well, oftentimes it's the freedom to defend yourself. Then goes speech, then goes belief. And again, I'm not a fan of believing in safety over freedom. I think the Founding Fathers would state, those who would sacrifice freedom for safety deserve neither. It's my personal stance on that. That said, happy Monday, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I know I wanted to get into more questions. I always intend to read more questions, but then I start getting into it and I just go too long on them. I hope, again, if you want me to make shorter answers and do more questions, tell me. I do enjoy longer conversations like that, but I kind of like going a little deeper into my thoughts sometimes with y'all. Let me know what you prefer. Join me again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Again, we do the show Monday through Thursday. I'll be traveling this week, but we'll still be doing the show, normal schedule. That said, again, I will see you tomorrow. In the meantime, please don't forget to like this video. And again, let me know what you think in the comments. I will see you all again tomorrow. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.